Hey guys, what's going on? Another quick video on some DIY triggers, this time on how I made my hi-hat. So what you're going to need is an acoustic hat. You are going to need a optional bottom hat. I'm using a low volume, actually this might be an old piece of a Jabeki hi-hat, but you can get these on eBay pretty cheap. It's just a set of low volume hats. It can be no name, it doesn't really matter. It's just for looks, really. It's not serving any other purpose than that. You may have to drill out the centerpiece so that your hi-hat controller can fit through. So when you press on the hat, the mechanism goes down and triggers the closed. You're going to need a hi-hat controller. This is a Go E-drum controller. It is, I'm pretty sure it's the same thing that Jabeki uses as well. It is a VH11 clone, the Roland hi-hat, so it works exactly the same way. When you close the pedal, the piston goes down, and yeah, that's how that works. You are also going to need something to work as your switch. So instead of using the membrane switch like we have under this one, we're not going to use that. If you want to use this, you can wire it the same way as these, but you'd have to put the switch on top because the hats are a little bit thicker and they don't flex as much. They don't work when you mount them underneath. So we're going to use a piece of metal as our switch, and I just used a cheap hi-hat I found on Amazon. It was some no-name, but it's conductive. We'll go over that later, the importance of that. So that's what's happening is if you look here, there's a slight gap. When I squeeze it, that is what's making my trigger. So when I hit the top of this hat, it is actually striking the bottom hat as well and making a switch. You're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4 piezos wired in series. And you also need to get some kind of dampening material to put in between the two hi-hats so that they're not touching. Again, you don't want them touching all the time. You want that gap there. So if you don't have that, it's not going to work. So that's in a nutshell. Let's move on to my workbench, and I'll walk you through this whole process. We're going to start with a crash course in wiring up these piezos and triggers and switches and everything. So it's important to note that you need a TRS. This lovely diagram here of a stereo TRS cable. You can see that there's 2 lines on it that represent, these are actually going to be your different zones on your trigger. So make sure you get stereo and not mono. That is important. On this thing we have a tip, we have a ring, and we have a sleeve. And then your wires are actually going to correspond to each one of these pieces here. And here, this lovely diagram is of different types of jacks, 1/4-inch jacks. So they come in different shapes and sizes that all do the same thing. They're just arranged a little bit differently. But they work the same way, it's just laid out a little bit differently. So each one of these diagrams corresponds to these different types here. So you can see on this guy here, we got these little metal posts sticking up. And as you slide in your 1/4-inch jack this way, the different parts of the jack are going to touch they're going to make contact with each one of these metal pieces. So if you're looking at it up top, the first one up here corresponds to the sleeve, the middle one's the ring, and the bottom one is tip. And then on this one, it's arranged kind of like in a circle. And then as you insert the jack up top, it's making contact. You can see there's like rings around the side, and each one of those is touching these arms here that correspond to the different parts there as well. So if you're looking at it up top, the farmost left goes to the ring, the middle goes to sleeve, and the far right goes to the tip. As you can see here with my corresponding lines. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, when you wire up a piezo, when you wire up your piezo, you got 2 wires coming off of it. A red wire, typically it's red and black wire. The red one goes to the center ceramic piece, and the black goes to the, what is it, brass? I don't know, the metal piece. I've seen them where they're both the same color. So in this example, ceramic is red, the metal piece is black. And if you are wiring up just a single zone trigger with no choke, nothing like that, just one zone like bow zone, or a tom or snare without the rim click, you just need to worry about 2 connections. Alright, so that's all you have to do for a single zone trigger. If you're using this type, you would send it to the sleeve, red wire to the sleeve, and the black wire to the tip. So let's do... if you're using that type. But for this example, we're just going to stick with this guy, so ignore this crap. So we have our single zone cymbal. You hit the bow, it makes a sound, nothing else. If you want to add a edge and choke to it, an edge zone, you need some sort of switch. And they usually come in these like circular, half dome membrane switches, where with 2 wires sticking out or 2 lead contacts coming out. And what happens is when you strike or press down on this film, there's actually 2 layers to it. So when you press down or hit it, 2 pieces of material inside are actually making contact and completing the circuit. So it's the same thing as if you were to short the 2 wires together. And that's how the membrane switch works. If you want to think of it as like a light switch, your circuit is off when the switch is down, right? And what happens is you're breaking contact from that wire. When you go ahead and flip the light switch on, that wire then makes contact again, completing the circuit. That's all this is doing too. It's just a fancier switch. You're pushing the 2 together. It's pushing these 2 wires together, completing your circuit. And when you wire up a switch, you want to send 1 wire to the sleeve, and then you want to send the other wire to the ring. And it doesn't matter which one, because again, all it's doing is making contact with each other. So if you switch these, it doesn't really matter. As long as they touch each other when you strike it, that's what's making your sound. Hopefully that shows up on camera. And that's going to be orange in this diagram. So you have 4 wires, 3 posts. The 1 wire on the switch is going to be soldered to the exact same post that the red wire from the ceramic piece of the piezo is going to. So these are going to be soldered together right here. So if you want to go ahead and take a screenshot of that, I know it's pretty archaic in design and looks like a caveman drawing, but 4 wires, 3 solder points, 3 connections, and the module does the rest of the work. All right, so now that we understand the basics of wiring up these things, let me show you how that translates to the hi-hat. This is actually a different hi-hat than the one I just showed you upstairs in the music room. But the same concept applies. It's just I'm using a low volume bottom hat instead of a solid, just a solid hi-hat for the second layer. But it's doing the exact same thing. The only difference is you don't have to drill any holes in this one because it already has holes, and it as part of its design. If you were to use the solid piece, you would have to drill a small hole so that you can feed some wire through it. So inside here is the piezo wired up just like our diagram. It's going to the 2 contacts there, and it's doing its job, right? I think the part that's probably the most complex is the switch mechanism. but it's really not complicated once you understand that, again, there's only 2 wires, and that the 2 wires are just making contact with each other, and that's what's creating the switch. Think of this hi-hat as our light switch, right? So right now it's in the off position. When I squeeze the hi-hat, that is then in the on position. And what's happening is the small gap in between the 2 metal pieces, when they touch, they're making contact, and because they're both conductive material, conductive surfaces, it's completing that circuit as if I was connecting 2 pieces of wire together. And to illustrate that, let me find my multimeter. All right, you don't need that. This is just to illustrate a point. But to show that we are completing a circuit, I'm putting this guy on this little siren mechanism here. It's just showing, it's going to make a beep whenever I make a complete circuit. So if I were to touch my leads together, we get a beep. If I touch the metal cymbal to itself, we're getting a beep. Same thing with the top hat, because they're both conductive. Now, it should be separated enough with some dampening material inside here that you can kind of see through here. There's actually a ring of foam that I put in place to make sure that they don't touch each other until I want them to touch each other. And let's see, let me keep it down here real quick. And I'm going to apply one lead to the top and one to the bottom. And they're touching, which means I have a short somewhere. Which is expected. I actually knew I had a short. I needed to repair this cymbal, so I brought it down to demonstrate this purpose. So when you have the 2 hi-hats on top of each other and they are making that beep together, that means the switch is in the on position, which we don't want. We want it in the off position always until we squeeze it or until we strike it and the impact from hitting the top cymbal presses it against the bottom cymbal, which is acting like a crash. And if we squeeze it, that's a choke, obviously. So let me loosen up this. All right, I took this thing off. And then we can show you what it looks like in between here. See, I have these 2, is it 2? Yeah, 2 just thin pieces of foam I had. This is my parts box for making triggers and stuff. It is just like 3mm, 2mm foam, nothing crazy, just enough to create a space in between. So if I were to separate these completely as if they weren't connected at all. So how are 2 metal cymbals going to act as our switch? So we've already established that the switch is just completing the circuit. We are essentially treating our cymbals as an extension of the wires going to the ring and sleeve. So if you see here, I have an exposed wire that is taped on top of this foam, not touching this one. That's important. So one wire is not touching here. I have another wire that's taped over here that is wrapped around one of these holes so that wire is making contact there. So if we go to our diagram, one wire, doesn't matter which one, remember, the ring wire is being wrapped around this metal piece here. The sleeve wire is exposed up top here. So it connected underneath here on the trigger. They are soldered to these 2 points with exposed wires on either side. One exposed wire going to this metal cymbal. One wire is bare, not touching anything, not touching this. But when we sandwich this cymbal on top, it will make contact with this one. And then what happens to get our switch, because the foam is separating the 2 pieces of metal, when we touch the cymbals together, we're completing the circuit. And that's what is our switch. So when it's in resting position, we have a gap. That's our off position. When it's squeezed or struck with a stick, that is the on position. So to recap, you're going to have 2 wires coming from one from ring and one from sleeve. You're going to strip the ends. One end is going to go to this cymbal. You can either wrap it around the holes and tape it, which is what I did. You can secure it, however, whatever mechanism you want to adhere the wire to the cymbal, just so the wire is making contact. And then the other wire that's going from ring or sleeve, the opposite one, would go on top of the foam so that it's not touching this one, but it will be touching our other cymbal when it's sandwiched on there. So if I were to separate these completely and applied my leads to them, so get in there, they are not beeping. But if I touch this one, beeps. Again, if I did this together, they should beep. Okay, it's hard to do one-handed. So, which brings me to my next point. It is important that you are using conductive materials. If you are not, they won't make when they make contact with each other, the current, voltage, whatever it is going through it, is not going to work. They need to be conductive metal. If you happen to have like a cheaper set of hi-hats that are not conductive, what you can do is use some kind of they make like copper tape or aluminum tape that is, I think, aluminum, and you can just coat the bottom of one of the cymbals to make it a conductive surface and achieve the same thing. So, why is this not working? So why was it shorting out when I first took this apart, right before I took this apart? The reason was I had my hi-hat clutch on too tight. So what was happening was it was cinched on there, squeezing both the top and bottom tight enough to where I was making contact with the two metal somewhere in here. It's kind of weird to pinpoint, but if any piece of the cymbals are touching, that's essentially creating completing that circuit. So because that was too tight, it was cranked on there and it was squeezing that foam, and I probably had it either not enough foam or squeezed too tight to where it was making contact. Without the clutch on there, just resting on top, I'm just going to make sure I don't have a short somewhere else. Another thing that can happen is maybe the wire you taped down came undone just from moving around, repositioning the cymbal. It came off the tape and started touching the other cymbal. I've had that happen to me as well. But if I take my leads, I'm going to stick one on top, and then I'm going to touch the bottom, and it is not going off. But if I squeeze it, it will beep. And to show you what I'm doing, I'm going to kind of... So, this is weird, looking backwards. One lead touching the bottom, one lead touching the top. I just touch both. And it's not beeping. If I squeeze it, it goes off. That's what you want. So this tool is not necessary. It is helpful. I think you can get them at Walmart for like $15. If you do any kind of electronics work, it's pretty valuable tool to have in your collection. And then for this, it just makes troubleshooting a little bit easier. So that's what we want. All right, I'm going to reassemble my hi-hat clutch, and this time I'm not going to crank it down super crazy. Gonna double check my work. I still have it too tight. So now what I'm going to do to troubleshoot is I'm going to add some more foam to it to raise up a little bit more, because I have this pretty loose. I think what's happened over time, when I first built this, it was working fine, working perfectly, but over time, like that compressed foam, like it's lost its squishiness. So I'm going to add another layer to it just to bring up the top hat a little bit more and break that connection. All right, there's not really a science to this. I just make it in like an even pattern so that the weight of the hi-hat up top is distributed equally. I have a bunch of different types of foam. Let's try this piece. So I'm going to use my existing pattern. I'm just going to put another layer on top of it. Piece there. And this foam is so thin, I think we should only be raising it a couple millimeters, maybe 3. I'm pretty sure this is 3 millimeter foam. So the foam comes in all different sizes. You just make sure you don't get something too thick where you're having to hit the living crap out of your cymbal just to get it to trigger. Okay, so I added, well, it might be tough to see on camera, there's 3 additional small chunks, about 1 inch, for each one of my my semicircle moon-shaped foam underneath. So it raises up another layer of foam. I stopped here because I wanted to make a point that the wire that we have exposed here that is not touching this, but will be touching the top hat, we're going to need to raise this up as well. If I leave this here, the top cymbal going to be resting on these 2 pillars here, pillars of foam, and this may or may not touch the top cymbal. So we need to make sure that we raise our exposed wire up too without having it touch this one. And that's what that looks like. So it's raised up a little bit, and I just add a little piece of gaff tape just to keep it in place, so as I put the top hat on, it doesn't flail around and droop over to the foam and actually touch this by accident. Alright, so that should be sufficient. I'm confident that this will fix our shorting issue that we had with the top hat sitting too close to the bottom hat, which was then completing our circuit. So let me try again. Put you guys there. Top hat going back on. Just line up your hole. Take out our trusty beep tool. And I'm touching the bottom hat, and I'm touching the top hat. And that's what we want. It is not beeping. Until I squeeze it, I do have to squeeze a little bit harder. But once we get the clutch back on, I'm going to crank it down a little bit tighter to sandwich the cymbals down. And you can see there's a gap between the cymbals. That's what you want all the way around. So you might have to play around with the foam or whatever material you use to separate it to get the response that you want. Like that, like if you're a light hitter, you're gonna have to hit this pretty hard to make these hit together. So just be aware if you do get some wonky cymbals shipped to you from eBay, that it's not a lost cause. You just have to compensate with either maybe like less foam on one side, or you can do thinner material all around. just to make sure that that gap is where it needs to be. All right, clutch is on. Let's double check our work again. Contact, no beeps, squeeze, beeps. All right, that's what we want. And that is it for wiring the hi-hat. To recap what we did there, you need at least one piezo. You can have multiple. So the example I have upstairs had 4, I believe. I had them in kind of like a box pattern, and they're just all wired in series. So all the red wires connected and all the black wires connected. And I don't know if it helps, but I feel like it's helping. The reason for splitting it into 4 like that is to give me more of a surface area to play the bow edge, so that I can hit it over here, I can hit it over here, and it'll still trigger. But if you have one, that's fine too. It's just you might have to play with your settings in your module to get it to work. So inside we have, in our trigger box, we have a single piezo on this example, where the black wire is going to tip. It would be the bottom peg over here. If you're using the other style, let's get our examples over here. Black wire is going to tip. Our red wire that is touching the ceramic on the piezo is going to sleeve. That's just for the bow zone. For our switch, instead of using the membrane switch, we're using 2 wires, one going to the top hat, one going to the bottom hat. And it doesn't matter which one is going where, as long as they're not touching. So one wire is going to the ring on the jack, where a bare end is touching the bottom hat. The top hat has a bare wire touching the top hat. The other wire is going to the sleeve. And then when you pinch them, that's making your switch like our light switch, our membrane switch. Squeeze it, or if you hit it, it makes contact, completing that circuit, and that is making the switch. So that is how you wire that up. The next piece we need to talk about is the controller, which is the easiest part. You can make, so they do have plans online where you can make a controller. These are cheap enough to save you, and they save you a headache. I want to say, they might have gone up over the years, but when I got this, I think I paid maybe $50 for this. It's already set up for you. You can buy one on eBay, Go eDrum, hi-hat controller. It even says VH11 on it. So it's a VH11 clone. If you have a Roland hi-hat, it's the same thing. It's just, I wouldn't say it's bootleg. It's just the same style mechanism. So we don't have to wire anything for this. I'm just using this. It works. It's easy. Plug and play. The piece you need to kind of worry about is making sure that your clutch is making contact with this. And you want, I use like a felt washer from a cymbal to kind of protect it. But if you're using a bottom hi-hat, this is not going to fit through the bottom hole unless you drill it out. So to do that, we're going over here. This is a step drill bit. You can get these for about 20 bucks, I believe. A metal step drill bit, and what it does is it shaves away material as you're drilling through the hole of the bottom hi-hat. And you need to make it big enough so that this fits through the bottom hat. And so that's all you really need to do for that. And the bottom hat really is just for looks. It doesn't serve a purpose other than that. It gives you the sandwich. I guess it has some feel to it as well, but there's no wiring or functionality to it outside of that. So that is it. Let's go ahead and take this back upstairs. All right, this guy is back in place. I just did a quick test to verify that it's still working. It is working as intended. And just another shot of what's going on underneath here. You can see the big hole that I had to drill out so that the piston on the controller can fit through. So that's the only thing you need to be aware of if you're using a bottom hat. And then I added this rubber U-channel just to mute it a little bit, just so it's not clanging around, making a bunch of metal sounds. So that's it. Hopefully this wasn't too all over the place and it was helpful. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to clarify. And good luck. Thanks a lot, guys. See ya.